So now let's talk a little bit about how learning happens and why formative assessment is so important. So imagine over here is the outside world, classroom environment, teacher giving instruction, and then over here is the individual student. So the student inside their mind has two forms of memory. One is working memory, or what you're thinking about, and then the other is long-term memory, what we consider like our knowledge or like our lasting memories. So long-term memory would actually be inside the head, but there wasn't enough room in this graphic, so that's why it's floating on top. So when learning happens, it's what you're thinking about then gets solidified into your long-term memory. And that's what learning is. And then when we take that information out of long-term memory and think about it and bring it back into our working memory, then we're remembering. Now, to get new information into long-term memory, what happens is that we have to activate prior knowledge and make connections to what we already know. So it's not enough to just present information. The student actually has to make a connection in their mind to what they already know in order for that to go into their long-term memory. So that's why it's so important to activate prior knowledge and help students make personal connections to the content. That's how it gets into long-term memory and is remembered. Now, sometimes there are some distractors or some problems with that happening. So, for example, not paying attention, not being motivated, or having a cognitive overload. The student is thinking about too many other things or they're confused by something. And when that happens, the information that comes in just goes right back out. It doesn't go into long-term memory. Now, another problem might be if there is no mental model, if the new information doesn't fit with what the student already knows, then it will also be forgotten. So that's why it's important to have some kind of background. When you try to learn something brand new and you have no experience, it can feel really overwhelming. It can feel like literally everyone is speaking Greek. So what was taught in this situation? So as the teacher, I taught these three topic areas. But the important question is what was learned? So you as the teacher, you know that you taught those three topic areas, but how do you know if the student learned them all? So the only way for that to happen is through formative assessment and feedback, where the student recalls that information through retrieval. And then once that information is outside the student, then you can see, hey, you know what? There were three topics here I taught, and the student only has one of them. So now I need to adjust my teaching by doing some remediation with that student, or helping them to make connections to what they already know, or helping them to be more motivated, or reduce the cognitive load, whatever you need to do for instructional interventions so that all of the topics are addressed. So another great thing about retrieval practice is that it doesn't just help with assessment, but every time something is retrieved, it gets stronger in the memory. So this is called the testing effect. It's really pretty interesting. It's just the act of retrieving something helps you to remember it better. So we call that retrieval practice. So that's another great reason for doing formative assessment. Not only does it help you to know what the student is learning, but it also helps the student to learn the information better because they're retrieving. So let's talk about learner variability, because this kind of model, this structure, is something that's common to all students, but we know that our students are individual learners. So here are some of the ways that your students will vary. One is in their sensory memory, so how that information moves into their working memory. And, so there might be some variability with vision ability, with a student being deaf or hearing impaired or having attention issues. So there are some sensory things that make each student unique. And then students have different amounts of working memory capacity. So this is often the case with students who have either learning disabilities or dyslexia or ADD. Their working memory capacity is a little bit smaller than the neurotypical child. This doesn't mean that they can't learn. It just means that you have to have smaller chunks and not so many at the same time. The other way that learners are unique is through their long-term memory. Every student has a different set of networks of mental models created inside their mind. So it's going to take a little bit of creativity to figure out how do you activate that for each learner. So hopefully this little explanation helps you to understand why formative assessment is so important.